Hola, Santo Domingo. Thank you. In April of 2007, during the war in Iraq, my unit was conducting a dismounted patrol in eastern Baghdad when we were engaged by an enemy sniper. The type of weapon system that they used was called a Dishka, which is normally an anti-aircraft weapon that Hezbollah converted into a sniper rifle. The bullet ripped through the left arm of one of my senior soldiers, Staff Sergeant Marlon Harper, severed his aorta, exited out of his chest, and then ricocheted into my upper right thigh and severed my femoral artery. I didn't know that I was shot at first, but I did feel that something was wrong. I could only hear the muted shots of the sniper rifle and my own voice calling for a medic. I could watch in slow motion as Staff Sergeant Harper's body slowly fell to the ground. And as I was dragging him to safety to perform aid on him in an effort to save his life, the slow motion time actually converted into a sense of fast motion time. My medic arrived a few seconds later, and I'd like to point out that my medic that day was only 19 years old. And this was the point in time that a 19-year-old kid had to make a conscious choice between who he was going to try to save and who he was going to let die. He couldn't save both of us. Now, from an objective medical standpoint, the medic made the right decision in trying to save me because my injury was slightly less severe. But it's still that 19-year-old kid that's going to have to live with the moral weight of that injury for the rest of his life. My men then dragged me into the vehicle to transport me to the nearest medical aid station in an effort to save my life. As I was in the vehicle, I started to become very weak, nausea, and felt like I was going to pass out. But I made it my only objective to stay conscious for the ride to that aid station because I knew I'd be in good hands with the medical team. A few minutes later, we arrived, and I was greeted by a team of 8 expert medical personnel. Every single person knew their specific job. They were calm, cool, and collective under pressure. I was inspired by the work that they did, and it gave me an enormous sense of comfort knowing that I was in such great hands. But despite that, as I was on the operating table, I could feel myself starting to die. In a catastrophic injury such as this, your body will actually pull blood to the chest cavity in order to protect the vital organs. And I could actually feel that happening. The blood would creep up from my extremities, and as all the blood would leave, they would cramp up and become numb. And then that blood creeping sensation moved up through my quads, and they became numb. And when that feeling hit my stomach, I knew the injury was getting out of control. It felt as if I was running wind sprints around a 400-meter track and couldn't stop. And then when that blood creeping sensation hit my chest, I consciously knew that that was it. I took my last breath, I said my last thought, and I died. I woke up approximately 2 days later in the green zone to learn that I had flatlined for 15 minutes straight. The surgical team that saved my life threw out all forms of futility in an effort to do so. And as a result of that, I continued the medical evacuation process back to the United States, recovered for about 4 months, and then volunteered to redeploy to Baghdad to finish the mission with my team. Thank you. Thank you. Now, a few years later, in 2009, the Department of Defense in the United States was starting to take very seriously the behavioral health challenges that our soldiers were facing when they returned from combat. Suicide rates were astronomical, families were being ripped apart, and quality of life was being destroyed. In an effort to combat that, the Department of Defense asked me to use my story and go on a national speaking circuit with the objective of reducing or eliminating stigma associated with help-seeking behavior. And I did that. But it didn't take me long to realize that our society has drastically oversimplified post-traumatic stress. That it has very little to do with seeing violence on the battlefield and much more to do with the deeper moral injuries associated with traumatic experiences. Shame, powerlessness, betrayal, and guilt. When those emotions are allowed to manifest, they can do so in a catastrophic fashion that has devastating consequences on your personal life, your families, your friends, and your loved ones. The challenges faced by the behavioral health system across the world and in the United States are enormous. At any given time in the United States, 1 in 5 adults is experiencing some type of behavioral health condition. And at the same time, the cost of mental health care in the United States ranks among the top 5 most costliest medical conditions in the country, spending over $300 billion a year in care. And when you look internationally, that number jumps into the trillions. But that being said, my instinct tells me that the scope of the problem is far greater than that. Moral injuries have the capacity to shake the very foundation of who you are. And we as human beings tend to focus on decisions that we make in microseconds. We tend to fault ourselves for those things. And we allow that to continue to spiral downward. And we forget about all the extenuating circumstances that were surrounding the event that led to that decision. When that seed is planted and is allowed to grow, that idea can spiral downward very quickly and develop into one of the most devastating and destructive things that the human mind can endure, leading to an enormous sense of isolation and hopelessness. It happened to me. Several years ago, I found myself standing in the corner of Several years ago, I found myself standing in the corner of my hotel room in Washington, D.C., not having a clue who I was anymore. I felt completely hopeless and completely alone. Despite being on the national speaking circuit, despite being a national advocate on this topic, and despite having a near clinical understanding of the subject, I still failed to recognize the moral injuries within myself. And during that moment in time, somehow, I found the strength to call one of my closest friends in a final act of desperation and ask for help. And much to my surprise, even though I adamantly believed that nobody could possibly understand the weight of what I was experiencing, he proved me wrong. Because a couple minutes later, during that phone call, he resonated with me in a way that I didn't think was possible. And he immediately connected me with one of the best clinical providers in the country. And this lady dropped everything that she was doing, cleared her calendar, and talked to me for 4 hours straight. Now, even though that experience completely turned my life around and set me down the path to healing, I went on from that point feeling extremely concerned and even guilty that many of the people that I knew and worked with and other people who experienced other conditions across the country and across the world did not have access to that level of care. Our behavioral health system is overwhelmed. And especially when we talk about moral injury, identifying a moral injury and uncovering it starts first and foremost with developing a powerful sense of trust between the patient and the provider. Some clinicians will strive for weeks, months, or even years to try to get to that point with a patient. And again, when we have 1 in 5 people who might be in need of that care, we can easily see how overwhelmed that system is, and that we can't exclusively rely on the behavioral health community to solve this massive problem. But I'm here to tell you today that every one of us in this room has the capacity to change that. Now, it takes a great deal of moral courage to do so, but if you are willing, with your friends and loved ones who might be struggling, to dive deep into the emotional state that they're in, truly and inherently understand what they are going through, walk through the depths of hell with them, and grab them by the hand and say, "We're not alone. You're not alone anymore, and I'm going to get you out of this," you can have the most life-changing effect on somebody that you could possibly imagine. Giving somebody the feeling that they're not alone anymore is possibly the most selfless and courageous act you can give to another human being in this lifetime. Now, as a way to compound that effect, many communities in the United States have started to develop holistic, integrative retreats that leverage the power of group dynamics and assets that are embedded within the local communities to help remove this sense of hopelessness and act as a gateway to further care. In the span of 1 week, we combine the traditional therapeutic approaches, such as group, couples, and individual therapy, with all of the emerging modalities: yoga, Reiki, massage, acupuncture, equine therapy, drama therapy, dance therapy, and spiritual healing exercises. Now, mind you, the people who attend this retreat, through the nature of their traumatic experiences, have seen the very worst side of humanity. But these retreats show them the very best side. And within a few days, we had people talking about the depths of their experiences for the very first time in their lives, despite trying traditional therapy for years in some cases. So I'd like to leave you with one thought. You know, as a public speaker and being involved in the behavioral health field for a very long time, I've often modified and changed my viewpoint as I continue to learn more about this subject. But there is one central truth that has never changed for me, and that I truly believe never will. And that is that the only force of nature powerful enough to overcome the moral injuries that are inherent to traumatic experiences is a strong sense of community and human connection. Thank you. Thank you.